Well, we have an extra guest with us who's just leaving. Would you be kind enough to leave, please?
Please, mind leaving the studio.
Why? Oh, John, come on, call it.
I would like to talk about comedy.
Oh, John,
I'm a comedy writer, one of the
John,
best in the
call
world.
it, for God's sake, love, you know.
Aren't you even on the screen yet? I thought I found it right.
Is he on? Are
Well,
we on?
as we'll be saying, as we'll be pointing out later on, comedy is a serious business. We never thought it was quite as serious as all that. Anyway, to continue, if you let me, we're on, you know. Several other critics have been summing up last year's television, and they've picked on comedy as one of the highlights. Perhaps not as big a highlight we've just seen, but still. This year, in other words this week, we've seen on BBC television the start of 2 new series of established successes. So tonight in Line-Up Review we'll be talking about television comedy with 6 people who are all involved in providing it, 5 of them as writers, 1 as producer. And I think there are no more here than there were when we left you last. You've just seen a sample of the work of 5 of them. So I'll introduce them in the same order as the clips. I don't really know.
I thought he was a friend of yours.
Let's meet the people who are here. John Chapman, who writes Hugh and I, which entered its 5th series on Monday. Ian Frenais, co-author with Dick Clement of The Likely Lads, first seen on BBC 2 and then on BBC 1. Marty Feldman, who with Barry Took writes The Barney Is My Darling scripts. The same team wrote The Walrus and the Carpenter. The radio work includes Round the Horne. Johnny Speight, author of...
Was John Antrobus in disguise?
Oh, so I see, yes. Anyway, you're the author of Till Death Do Us Part, which was shown in Comedy Playhouse last July, and the show's to be a basis for a new series. Johnny Speight, of course, also writes for Arthur Haynes. Richard Waring, who with Michael Mills adapts the Wodehouse stories for the world of Wooster, and he himself was also the author of Marriage Lines. Finally, the one man whose work we haven't seen yet, but which we will see a little of later, producer Duncan Wood, whose long list of credits include, of course, Hancock so far and Steptoe and Son. Right, could we start this ball rolling with, perhaps maybe it started a while ago, but never mind, with this statement about comedy being a serious business, but never as serious as in the electronic age. That quote from the Times, which you saw. Marty Feldman, what would you make of that?
I don't know, love, I have to speak personally, I can't speak for all the sort of rogues gallery sitting around here, but it isn't, for me it isn't serious. You write because you think it's funny, and it isn't a business, Business is something else, business is something your agent organises afterwards. You write shows because you think they're funny,
Well, to me, it's very serious and not electronic.
Oh.
Well, electronic, you can plug in, it's down, like,
Well, the point is that presumably anyway, that it is tougher to write for the television medium than it has been for any other medium. I suppose if it means anything, that's what it must
for any
mean.
medium, I think.
Well, any other comments on that statement? John Chapman.
Well, I think I find television tougher merely because of deadlines and this sort of thing. And, of course, the other thing is that we keep running out of ideas and plots. You don't need a very big plot, but in the end you find yourself not looking at other people's programs in case you get influenced by them, at least I do, and digging up somebody else's story.
I was trying to think of a reason for not watching Hard Metal, though.
It's tougher because of output and because the trend of comedy series is much more, as much emphasis is less on mechanical gags and more on validity of the characters. All the clips we've seen this evening.
Yeah.
Is it? Sorry.
I was just wondering, is it because of the pressure of turning out scripts for television, the fact that it eats up material so quickly? Is this the reason why, in fact, situation comedy is really taking over?
The great fear, certainly at the back of my mind every time, is that the fact there's going to be this controversial question of a studio audience, the end product. I know this is about... They're marvellous, they're absolutely wonderful nearly every time. But this is something that I personally worry about. Yes, and they are our only... the only way we can judge, they're the most immediate way and the nearest way we can judge whether the stuff is funny or not, whether they laugh.
Oh, and come on.
I do believe in this.
Come on.
I think
they
that
don't
you
laugh, so it's a rotten show.
I think you write better, knowing that it's going to be played to an audience.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so at all.
An audience there.
Well, personally, I write what I think is funny myself, personally. If the audience don't laugh, well, sod them, you know. I'm not concerned with them.
Johnny, look,
I write what I think is funny.
yeah, but you know, if they don't,
you have to do that.
Yes, but
you
you
do
said
it.
You said
You
you
do
liked
it.
marriage lines.
love comedy.
Yeah.
Would, listen,
You
Johnny,
write the way, but
Johnny,
Marty, when you
Johnny,
If they
com-
laugh, it's great.
Johnny,
minute,
comedy
no,
with
no one counts.
Johnny, for
Once,
God's
so that,
sake,
you know,
love, you
even
know.
if it was your talent, you know, if you haven't got it, you'll die.
John, comedy
got it,
without
you
an
know,
audience
you're
just
there, you're
doesn't
there.
work, love. You know, comedy depends on an audience, love. You know, if nobody
Doesn't
laughs,
matter about your, you know,
oh come on, love. You know,
It doesn't matter about the studio audience.
it matters if you have a
the
studio audience. It
audience
matters about
doesn't
them. You know.
matter.
It's a
Oh, I know,
criterion.
It's okay. You say this, Johnny. You write the damn thing. You get out there and perform it, love. It matters. If
I'm
the
not-
audience
I'm not an
like,
actor.
hey, let
I'm
me
not an
finish.
actor,
Don't
you
come
see.
on
I'm
like
not an
this.
actor. I'm a writer. I'm not an actor.
Right,
Well, let me
put the
finish.
Patrick Campbell bit. You know, if you're doing a bit, a comedy bit, love, and the audience
Don't
laugh.
shoot me, please.
No, wait a minute,
What's
love.
that gun in your hand?
No, listen, love. If you're doing a comedy bit and the audience laugh, this conditions the way you perform the next bit.
They
You know?
quite often laugh at the wrong places also.
Okay, but if you're going to have an audience, love, you have to work too.
We're talking about, yeah.
All right, forget the audience, fine.
All I
love,
was
you know,
saying,
but as
it
long as you
doesn't
have
matter.
them, as long as you
write
have
for the
them.
audience. You write for the audience.
No, for God's sake.
No.
Johnny, no. But as long
You
as you
write for
have,
the-
no, John.
That's
But
it.
Can I call this for a moment and
Yeah,
call
but
in
do
Ian?
it.
Well, I
Mm.
agree with Johnny that we try and write very much not for an audience,
But for yourself,
But-
for yourself.
for yourself.
If
But
they laugh,
after you've done a series,
you
like Lads Laugh,
Yeah,
You
yes.
don't write for
you
them.
become tremendously aware of the audience. And Dick and I find ourselves in the position of saying, now, are we writing this for the audience?
When you start writing for
there's
them,
tremendous
you're finished,
temptation
you're
because
finished.
because there's tremendous help to the performers, the studio audience.
Yes,
And you
exactly.
start thinking to yourself,
Well,
that's a sure thing. Studio audience are like that. And we try to say, let's ignore that. No, I agree with you. We're trying to say, let's
You
ignore
can't tell
that.
us to the actors, Ian. You know?
I agree with you.
They're
And-
influenced by an audience.
But knowing the studio audience there is constantly influencing the way we write. We try to combat this. We say, no, that's very naughty. We mustn't think of studio audience.
You write for yourself. When you start writing for an audience, you're dead. You're done for.
John, when
Can we-
you,
I
when you
wanna
write
leave
for
the
yourself, you
audiences.
write novels, baby. You don't write television shows, you know.
Well, I want to leave the audience for a moment, really, and move on to something else, which...
Well, I don't want to leave. I
Well,
like the audience. They're marvellous. They laugh at my shows.
If the
You know,
audience
marvellous.
don't laugh,
I like
love,
them.
have you got a bad show?
They laugh at my shows. They're marvellous, you know, but I don't write for them. They enjoy it.
But,
Well, I
you
want to
know,
ask
if
you. I
our-
want to
our-
ask you a bit about writing situation comedy. I mean, you're not going to agree on this question of the audience, and
No.
this is fairly clear. So I want to move on to something else. In writing situation comedy, are you? What's the approach to this, which is different from writing funny gags for somebody to stand up
Well,
and
I
do?
personally don't write situation comedy. I write character comedy. I think situation comedy is dead door now. You know.
What's the difference?
Well, it's the fact that a situation, you enclose your character in it. A character comedy, he makes his own situation. He makes the situation. The character makes it.
Well, could you give me an example of what you mean by
Oh,
situation
Charlie
comedy?
Chaplin, for instance, or it was quite W.C. Thought, they make their own situation. Steptoe and son, they make their situation. You've got two men that will make their situation. You get a situation comedy, you enclose them in, you think, it's a funny idea if two people did this and the other, and that is, you know, like Whack or Fast, you know, where they're enclosed in a box where they have to work, they're called into the box, you know, it's like that, you know.
I'd have called Steptoe character comedy myself.
It's,
Is that what you were saying? I'm sorry.
It's character comedy, yeah.
You nodded
Up again, didn't you?
No, I didn't.
He's asleep again, you see, good old Mary Lyons!
John Chapman. Yes.
Well, we talk about situation comedy. This is really farce, though one never talks about farce in television terms. Very seldom. If it is comedy, character comedy, then this is what in the theatre we could term comedy, and certainly you don't have to have a belly laugh every 2 or 3 lines. But I think situation comedy being farce, there is nothing there unless there is a woofer, as they say, a belly laugh every so often. So it is a more contrived affair. There isn't so much room for bringing out
It is more control,
character.
yeah. The character, you know, creates his own situation, you know.
Yes.
If you've got a marvellous character, he starts to talk himself and starts to, you know.
Yeah.
I find it might be coincidence, it mightn't be the definition of situation comedy, but certainly it's reflected in all the situation comedies on our television at the moment, and indeed in the clips we've seen. It might be a trend, it might really be to do with situation comedy, but there seems to be 2 levels now, one of which is, if you like, mechanical effect of creating laughter, and there's this other level where all the characters now have a certain depth, and it enriches you more watching them, just as it would any other form of drama, and that even if the laughs aren't there, people become very interested in the characters without the laughter. This is the comedy that interests me, and this is what I find the main difference between British and American television comedy. I can watch people that started, I think, with Hancock and Steptoe and the Crib and Flannel and Wallace and the Carpenter, where if it wasn't a particularly funny script, I get terribly interested.
You're
in the
interested
characters
in
themselves.
the people,
These two lads and the
you're
people.
seeing life. Yeah,
This
that's
is
it, right,
reflected in
Sorry to
Can't
mark
remember.
anything that I was to do, but where does Wodehouse fit into that, Ian?
nowhere at all.
We were going to bring it round to that soon, you know, to make you feel happy.
Nowhere at all. That was is
Well, no depth of
on that bit.
There is no depth, is
No,
there?
but you know,
not really, no,
you know,
not on that,
this is
Yes,
talking
but
about.
this is...
Okay, there's no. But
This is
Richard, this
white,
is talking
this
about
is
one
old
kind of
Richard.
comedy.
It doesn't
That's
add up.
farce, pure
It does
farce,
not add up
exactly.
to
Richard, there is,
life,
you know,
Wodehouse,
for God's sake, this is one kind of comedy. This is not saying this is the only kind of comedy.
No,
Look,
not at all.
comedy is only character comedy. You know, for Christ's sake, love, there's plenty of room, you know.
I'm not saying I'm delighted about
comedy
it.
of
I
plot,
thought,
comedy of situation, you know.
I
Yeah,
thought
you
at
know.
one time that depth of character was becoming all, you know,
Yeah.
and in danger of swamping everything.
Yeah, well, this is true.
That's why I was particularly delighted after very many worrying weeks when Wodehouse had a measure of success because there was no depth to these characters. And I think they almost succeeded in P.G. Woodhouse's books are tremendously successful. A remarkable number of people I found in the studio audience, for instance, had never actually read a book, although they'd heard vaguely about the
but
main
Richard, love,
characters.
nobody is talking about the way of doing comedy. We're talking about ways of
No,
doing
I was only making
comedy,
one
you know.
point, Marty.
And Wodehouse is a very valid way of doing comedy, so it's marriage lines, you know.
Duncan Wood, could I bring you in
Comedy
for
of
one?
situation, comedy of plot. This is fine, great, you know, who's complaining, love? I laugh like hell when I watch marriage lines.
Joking, do you?
Yeah, I do a lot.
Oh, marriage line.
No, I really do,
Marriage
you know.
line, yes. Now,
can't-
marriage line is a great show.
It
But
bugs me
Wodehouse
because
is
I
a
can't
rotten show.
stand
in my
what she's
opinion,
wearing, you know. This is
I can't stand P.G. Wodehouse. The whole thing is rotten, you know, the whole conception
Oh
of
no,
it.
you're wrong. John.
Marriage line
You
is
know.
my, it's my
John,
opinion,
you
you
know,
know.
for God's sake.
So I don't laugh at Wodehouse, I laugh at marriage lines.
We haven't heard from the man who...
Yeah, Duncan, I'd like
he's
to
in a
ask you this.
dangerous position.
Has this whole development towards situation comedy or character comedy, which, you know, this distinction I don't quite understand in full yet, but never mind that, has this trend towards this kind of comedy series raised the whole level of the comedy writer to a point where there's much difference between a comedy writer and a playwright?
Yeah, I don't understand some of it either. But yes, I think
He plays great golf.
what's that got to do with it? It doesn't help writing. Yes, I think it has. Of course it has, because in raising any kind of standards, and I think technically and from performance point of views and writing point of views, everything has gone up. It's demanded more and it's gotten more.
Wasn't it going up anyway, though, Duncan?
Well,
It's
that's
the
what I
end of
say. Everything has gone up. You are being
Yeah.
asked now
Yeah. I mean, you know,
to be
it's
much
still-
more of a technician,
Dun-
much more of a perfectionist,
No, but Duncan,
and
oh,
you are,
yeah.
because you're made to do it.
No, all I'm saying, love, is has television forced the standard up, or was it going anyway, love, you know?
In what other avenue?
Well, you know, the standards have gone up everywhere, love, you know.
Where?
Okay. I wouldn't say
Not the
that.
standards of, yes, yeah, well, you know, I'm sorry, I think they have, you know, people are kind of asking themselves sort of totally kind of important questions, much more. Yeah, this, oh Christ, that sounds awful.
I
You
don't
know what I mean?
Writers are...
How much
No,
noise
but,
you want?
no, but look, 20 years
You're on
ago...
both sides. You're
no,
on one
love,
side
I'm
one
not.
minute,
No.
and then next minute.
No, I'm not, love. I'm saying 20
Then
years,
where do you
20
stand,
years
love? Where do
ago,
you stand?
comedy writers wrote jokes. That's it, love, you know.
Oh, yes,
End
but
of argument.
20
you know.
years ago, comedy writers didn't write jokes. Look, please, get this out of your mind. Dickens wrote the comedy writer.
Who was?
Dickens was a comedy writer.
Yeah.
Yeah, so don't say 20 years ago, it didn't start with you, comedy, or
Darling,
me.
Dickens had been writing for
But
television,
don't
he'd been
make
writing
statements like
Coronation
20 years
Street,
ago,
you know.
comedy writers wrote jokes,
He
you
would have
know.
written Coronation Street, and they've written it very well, but that's beside the point.
No, I mean,
you
when
know.
you write as well as Dickens, you know, you'll make a fortune. You know,
Please
all right,
God,
so, you know,
my father
all right.
says,
Well,
you
don't
know.
knock Dickens, you know.
No, I'm not
He's
knocking
not Coronation
him, love.
Street, all
I'm
right?
not knocking Dickens.
Okay,
you
well,
know.
well, don't say then that 20 years ago, comedy writing started. It didn't start then. It started with Jonathan Swift. It
Johnny,
started
are
with,
you
you know...
deliberately trying to misunderstand me? You know, you shouldn't say that, love.
Ian Lafreniere.
Writers, I'm sure, in comedy have never had it better than now, with the emphasis taken off the performance of the personality of a comedian, where many of the series we write employ actors, with the emphasis on an actor, on a comedian. I'm sure we've never had it so good, for our point of view. You write something which is then cast and produced, rather than the old emphasis of writing.
Well, writing
for
comedy
somebody
really is something you
presenting
feel
gags.
and think. You write something, and if you can get it done, you get it done. If you can't get it done, it's still comedy to you. And I personally write for myself. All right, well, I think it's funny. If it's not done, okay, I still think it's funny. And if I write it and others don't laugh, I still think it's funny. You know, I don't work on this mechanical electronic, as you said earlier on, with as old as apparently you do.
Apparently what I do what?
Yes, but I'm saying, isn't it
Well,
with your
electronic age, you judge your comedy by the laughs you get.
No,
And I
for
don't
God's
judge
sake.
it. I judge how much I laugh.
No, you know.
Well, come on, just say what you mean then, you know.
I'm saying what I mean, love. If you are writing in television, love, you're not working. You know, this is not Ivory Tower. Love. You know, this
Wherever
isn't- dig
I
it and it's
write, I
great,
write
love,
for
you know.
myself. if I'm writing a term, if I'm writing a
Yeah,
television, and
all
I
right,
can't-
love,
if I
and you
can
get dodgy town ratings, and nobody asks you to write anymore, and there
I'm
you
not
go,
bothered,
Johnny
John, I'm not
Speight, you
bothered.
know.
I write for myself.
He's still got a
I'm
better
writing for
climate
myself.
now to write
Television
in.
love
I
is
have to live by
yeah.
myself, you know. If I'm writing rubbish, I can't live myself. If I'm getting great time writings, it means nothing. I have to write for myself, you know.